Hi, everybody. It must be noon, and it must be the American Banjo Museum virtual at noon. Welcome. My name is Johnny Baier. I'm the executive director here at the American Banjo Museum in Oklahoma City. We are delighted to be able to share some of our treasures at the American Banjo Museum with you as we all go through this really weird time in our history. I know a lot of banjo people are kind of stuck at home and looking for stuff to do, and that's why we're here. Hopefully, by the end of this time that we all get through together, we'll have had a chance to share some of the things that make the American Banjo Museum unique and give you some new perspective on some of the stuff we do here. A lot of people wonder, what do they do there when we're not watching? Well, now you're going to get a kind of a eagle eye or a sneak peek into what we do when you're not in Oklahoma City. What we're going to be talking about today, and as we go through this whole program of different previews and overviews of some of our exhibitry, we're going to be doing something really special today. The man, Jim Henson, the creator of the Muppets, is a guy that virtually everybody is familiar with in one way or another. One way that a lot of people are not familiar with Mr. Henson was his lifelong love for the banjo. I'd like to give you a little overview of why a banjo museum is honoring Jim Henson. It all happened several years ago here in Oklahoma City. One of our biggest supporters and now a member of our staff, Lucas Ross, happened to be walking around downtown Oklahoma City. And Lucas is a huge Jim Henson and Muppets fan. And he recognized Jim Henson's daughter, Heather, who happened to be walking through downtown Oklahoma City. Not able to contain himself, Lucas introduced himself to Heather Henson, and they got to talking, and in the conversation, it came out that Lucas was heading to the American Banjo Museum. Heather at that point says, "Is there a banjo museum? And if there is, I've got something that should be there." So they got to a brief discussion talking about a banjo that Heather Henson had in her collection of Jim Henson memorabilia. This particular banjo was the one that was used to record the soundtracks for the Muppet shows back when they were done and recorded in England. Now, that banjo was signed by many celebrities and stars that were part of the Muppet Show when those shows were being taped. So it was a real special instrument that Lucas came and told me about. And I said, well, that's wonderful. If we can get it, we'd love to have it and put it on display. And that started the wheels rolling and telling us where we were headed with this particular exhibit. I said to Lucas, I tell you what, Lucas, we got the banjo, that's great. Is there any way we could get a Muppet? Maybe if we could get Kermit here, wouldn't that be great? And conversations ensued, and it didn't look like there was too much chance because Kermit's a pretty popular guy, and it just wasn't a Kermit for us to see. So what we did is we went out to California one day. I had an opportunity to be out in Los Angeles and visit with the Jim Henson Company out there in the Charlie Chaplin Studios on La Brea Avenue. If you're a film nut like I am, just the fact of walking through the gate of the Chaplin Studios was a big, big thrill for me. Add to that studio is now the home of the Jim Henson Company out there, and you realize that it was a pretty special day for me to be sitting in Los Angeles in the Charlie Chaplin Studio with people from the Jim Henson Company talking about bringing an exhibit about Jim Henson to the American Banjo Museum. That conversation led to another coincidental trip out to New York City, where I had a chance to meet with Karen Falk, who is the curator and director of the archives for the Jim Henson Company. And we talked more about the possibilities for a Jim Henson exhibit here at the American Banjo Museum. One of the things, again, I reiterated to Karen was our hope that we could get Kermit to come to Oklahoma City. And she was hesitant, but ultimately, by the end of our meeting, brought out the guy you're going to meet in a few minutes here. It was a thrill beyond compare. And while I'm not the Muppet fan that Lucas Ross is, everybody who grew up with Kermit can't help but be touched and moved when there he is right in front of you. And that happened. And Karen agreed that Kermit could come out and visit us for the exhibit, and we put a banjo together, and we put Kermit together, and then we said, well, let's blow this into a full exhibit about the life and career of Jim Henson. And thankfully, the Jim Henson Company had already compiled a huge amount of resources, photographs, and history of Mr. Henson's entire life and career, which they were willing to share with us here at the American Banjo Museum. So back in September of, I guess it would have been 2018, we were able to open what we call Jim Henson Life and Legacy. This exhibit has been a true blockbuster for us. Virtually everybody knows Kermit. Everybody knows the Muppets. They know the Jim Henson story to a degree before and after the Muppet movie or that sort of thing. So you have some of the earlier productions or the later productions. But somehow, Mr. Jim Henson has touched virtually everybody somewhere. Right now in our country, we need that optimism and that positive spirit that Jim Henson brought to us all. And we have been honored since September of 2018 to be sharing that with our visitors here at the American Banjo Museum. What I'd like to do, joining us via satellite or some sort of amazing technical stuff, is Karen Falk. She's out in New York right now. And as I mentioned, she is curator and director of the Jim Henson Archives. And Karen, if you would, why don't you share a little bit of the background of Jim Henson and his banjo passion that found its way into his work throughout his life and career?
Well, we've discussed on multiple occasions, Johnny, but Jim was a big lover of banjo music. He wasn't a player of banjo music, but he really appreciated the sound, and he loved the instrument. He felt it was very expressive and appropriate for his characters. Going back to the late 1950s, he was using banjo music on his show Sam and Friends, which he had on local Washington television. There's a really great piece of Kermit playing the banjo to Bob Gibson track of a horse named Bill. And it's a really great piece, and it shows Kermit playing the banjo and really loving it. And then throughout the 60s, Jim used banjo music. He was, of course, on the Jimmy Dean Show from 1963 to 1966. And he would have met lots of musicians there that played banjo, heard a lot of banjo music. Froggy Went a Courtin' was a favorite song, for obvious reasons. And that got played on the Muppet Valentine Show and the Muppet Show. And then there was the Muppet Trio, the country trio, which had 3 country musicians, one of which was fashioned after Jim. And actually the banjo that you have there that Kermit is playing in your museum was the banjo that the Jim puppet played as part of the country trio. So that's a lot of fun. And then on the Muppet Show, and Jim really took the lead on choosing the music for the Muppet Show. There were quite a few country music and folk artists that were on that show, of course, including Roy Clark and Steve Martin, both banjo players who were featured in your museum.
Knowing or finding out as part of this project that Kermit's banjo passion in playing goes back to the 50s was a surprise to me. And when we saw that film of Kermit playing on Sam and Friends, it was as delightful as it was exciting. So I can't tell you what a thrill again it's been to be part of this and working with the Jim Henson Company and the Disney Company and the Jim Henson family and Heather Henson to put this all together. Karen, how long have you been in the Jim Henson Company or Jim Henson family?
I think it's about almost 28 years next month. So I've really been quite lucky getting the opportunity to work with all this material all these years.
Were you a Muppet fan? Was that what brought you to the Jim Henson Company?
I was a Muppet fan, but it turns out I really didn't know anything until I got there. And there was so much more depth to the story than I ever imagined.
Well, you must have the feeling that I had when we started to put this exhibit together, because through your help and the help of Heather Henson and all of the Jim Henson folks, we've been able to tell this story of an amazing life and career that Jim Henson had. One of the things that I thought we'd start to get into, a couple of the artifacts in the exhibit here, is the banjo that started it all. Yeah. When we heard about it, it was kind of a is this really possible that this banjo exists? And it turns out it does. A musician, he was a studio musician in England named Martin Kershaw. He was the guy who played the banjo on the soundtrack, and he played guitar as well on the soundtrack for the Muppet shows that were recorded in England. And in I believe it was 72, but please forgive me if the date is wrong, but when Julie Andrews appeared on the Muppet Show, Martin asked her to sign the head of the banjo, and which she obliged. And it started a tradition that carried on through the entire production of the Muppet Show. What happened was every time a star would come on, Martin would ask them to sign the banjo, to the point where there was literally no space on the head of the banjo, the white part, for people to be able to sign their head or sign their names. But if you take a look at it, you're going to find that you'll see Roy Rogers, Gene Kelly, Elton John, Diana Ross, just an amazing array of show business celebrities that all made their mark on this very special banjo. Lucas, can we get a shot of the banjo? Is that possible?
Yeah.
I'm going to have Lucas come over here. He's going to do some magic camera movement. Maybe we can get over and take a good look at this really, really special banjo. Now, in terms of a musical instrument, this isn't a very, very valuable collector's item. It's a banjo that reflects what a banjo player could afford to play. But because of where it was and how it was used, that's what makes this banjo special. Take a look down here. You're even going to see Jim Henson right under the bridge with a little Kermit face. Elton John below him. Shirley Bassey, Johnny Cash. I mean, everywhere you go. Happy Trails from Roy Rogers and Trigger. Great film artist, Gene Kelly. I mean, it goes on and on. Lou Rawls. We could spend all day going over this banjo. Suffice it to say, this is a true treasure and piece of banjo history. And that's what got it started. So when we think of this banjo sitting in this lovely showcase here in the American Banjo Museum and the little Kermit surrounding it, it's wonderful. But to be able to put the banjo in the context of where it came from is the true joy of this exhibit. Let's take a look around here, Lucas, if you can follow me. Every panel that follows this wall here takes a different chapter in the life of Jim Henson. It's an amazing story, starting from his youth in Mississippi. And no matter how you remember him with his beard, and as we all got to know and love him, like all of us, he started out as a little kid and just had this passion for whimsy, passion for things that would make people smile throughout his entire life. That's the joy that he encompassed in himself and brought to everyone else. As we go around here, I don't know how far we'll be able to stretch, but you will see some of the early years of Muppetry. And by the way, Jim and his wife, Jane, coined that phrase, Muppet. It is started with Sam and Friends back in Washington, D.C., when it was a show aimed primarily, I have to say it had to be aimed at adults because they put it on right before the evening news in Washington, D.C. Maybe it took the edge off of everyone and their political woes or whatever it was, but it certainly introduced some of the early Muppet characters, early versions of some of those that we've come to know and love over the years. You will find Jim Henson was also a budding filmmaker and really experimenting with film techniques, cinema techniques that hadn't been used prior to him coming in. His film Timepiece is one very good example, if you can find it, to get a hint of how his creative mind worked when it got behind a camera, not necessarily behind a Muppet. So we can go all the way around here. I could spend a lot of time trying to go over every one of these. Suffice it to say that the life and career of Jim Henson was nothing less than amazing and truly added joy and a positive spirit to every life that he touched. So this exhibit is going to be up at the American Banjo Museum. We're going to have to close it in May, at the end of May. But if we can get through this, again, this weird time and get our doors open again, we would love to have you come and see this. Now, before we get too far, I'm going to go on a limb here, and if Karen will chime in a little bit later when we can, I'd like to be able to offer people a chance to see these panels on our website. So Karen, please let me know later if that's okay, if we could share these panels for the folks who can't get to the museum, and if so, we will get a link up, and then they'll be able to see all of these photos and the story as it goes along. But regardless, if you can get to the museum, that's the best way to see it, because it's a really, really fun and fitting tribute to one of our favorite people. Now, let's, if we can, Lucas, why not, let's go over towards the theater here, because I see, if we can get the camera in here right now, this is a quick clip of Kermit back in one of his early incarnations on Sam and Friends in 1960. That's an early version of Kermit. And there we have the Country Trio, where a Muppet version of Jim Henson is part of it, playing the banjo. Now, one of the things that we want to get into is Kermit in the banjo. If there's any connection to the banjo that just about everyone knows between Jim Henson and the banjo, it is those magical 3 minutes and 20 seconds that open the Muppet movie. Jim Henson and his lifelong passion for the banjo, and of course we all have to kind of think his alter ego, Kermit the Frog. We're telling a wonderful and optimistic story about how anybody can accomplish anything in the words and the music of the Rainbow Connection. Paul Williams' wonderful composition that was brought to life by Jim Henson actually singing the voice of Kermit at the beginning of the film. Well, we all know that just like the Muppets had to be created, they had to do some special props for the Muppet movie as well. So the Jim Henson creative team got on board and started to create a real special banjo for Kermit. It had to be Kermit size, but they wanted it to be very special for Kermit. And what we have here as part of this exhibit is the original pencil drawing for the banjo that was made for Kermit for the Rainbow Connection and the Muppet movie. It was all scaled down to size for Kermit's proportions. The neatest thing, if you're a banjo player, is this little detail right here. This on a banjo is called the tailpiece. And in this particular case, they made a tailpiece that has a K for Kermit in it, which I think is wonderful. Now, that particular banjo is on exhibit right now in Leland, Mississippi, with another Jim Henson exhibit in Jim Henson's hometown. So that particular banjo wasn't available to us, but we were able to put our hands on something kind of nice as well. So I tell you what, let's take a stroll over there and show you that. When I talk about the possibility of getting Kermit here and Karen Falk making that happen, it was, I think, one of the high points of anything we've done here. Kermit is so beloved, and he is something that the Jim Henson Company is so proud of, and they're very protective of Kermit, and I would be too. But when they were willing to share with us the Kermit you're about to meet, we were all like blown away. He came here via courier, and he was brought and protected all the way until we were able to bring him right here to the American Banjo Museum and share him with our visitors. Now, Kermit that you see here, I think in the last year and almost year and a half, has been photographed more than any of the 400 banjos in the museum. I think it's safe to say 10,000 photographs have been made of this little guy, because everybody wants to have their picture taken with Kermit. When Kermit arrived, he did not have a banjo in his hand. So we were talking about that, or alluded to it a little bit earlier. Kermit was waving at the folks and giving a nice greeting, but there wasn't a banjo in his hands. prior to opening the exhibit here, Jim Henson's daughter, Heather, visited with us, and she says, "Where's the banjo? Where's Kermit's banjo?" And I had said, "Well, the banjo we had hoped to get from the Muppet movie, that's already taken." And Heather made a couple of phone calls, and within about a week or so, through the cooperation of Karen Falk and the Disney Company and a bunch of people behind the scenes, they were able to find this little banjo that he's holding right here. Now, this is not the banjo that was in the Muppet movie, but it was the banjo that was used on the Muppet Show when there was a Muppet character in the form of Jim Henson as part of the Country Trio. And the banjo that Kermit's playing here was that banjo that was used in the Muppet Show as part of the Country Trio. So it's a real special part of Muppet history, even though it's not the one that was used in the Rainbow Connection in the Muppet movie. So it's that banjo connection that makes every banjo player really get a thrill when the Muppet movie comes on, and it all starts with Kermit and that wonderful song, The Rainbow Connection. So I want to ask you folks to try and make your way to Oklahoma City. Try and get to us before all of this, kind of goes away. I will say it's been one of the most positive things of our entire existence to be able to bring the story of Jim Henson and that wonderful banjo and Kermit the Frog to the American Banjo Museum and share it with our visitors here. Before we take off and bid you adieu for the day, I want to thank Karen Falk for joining us. Karen, do you have anything you'd like to add to what we've done here today?
Well, there's one little thing that we lent you from the family collection that is in the exhibit. That's a drawing that Jim Henson did of a banjo player. And I would love to highlight that if possible.
Yeah, let's do that. I'll tell you what, I'll take the camera around there and Lucas will go do the shooting. And I forgot to do this. Thank you for reminding me. This
Sure.
is, why don't you tell a little bit about the history of it?
Well, Jim Henson, going back to the Salmon Friends days, wanted to have his own show, a network show, some sort of show with the Muppets eventually, 15, 20 years later, getting the Muppet Show. But this drawing is from about 1961, and it was part of a pitch that he was putting together for a show called Sing a Song. And it was going to be sort of a folk music show with characters highlighting folk music or country music. And those were some of the characters he designed. You see a little frog back there, but of course the banjo player would be the host. And he just did a few drawings, and we had them in a file in the archives, and nothing ever came of it. But it was just one of many pitches that Jim worked on as he tried to get a Muppet Show on the air, which of course didn't happen until 1976. But I thought it was such a charming piece, and we had never shown it before. It had never been reproduced or exhibited, and this was just the absolute perfect place to show that little piece of Jim Henson artwork.
Thanks, Karen. It was really nice of you to remind me, because I probably would have forgot to do that, as you are very well aware. So again, thank you to Karen Falk. Thank you to Heather Henson. Thank you to the Jim Henson family, Jim Henson Productions, Disney, the Muppet Studios. Are we forgetting anybody?
I think that's pretty much everybody, and Lucas certainly.
And Lucas Ross for his passion for the Muppets is where it really all started, because if he wouldn't have been in that very coincidental spot a couple of years ago, none of this would have happened. So thank you, Lucas. Now, before we sign off for the day, I want to thank you folks out in Internet land for joining us at the American Banjo Museum virtual at noon. We'll remind you, tomorrow we're going to be doing a little preview of an upcoming exhibit, The Women of the Banjo, and you'll be able to see some of the artifacts that are going to be part of that exhibit. And then on Thursday, if you're a banjo player, I'd like to invite you to join us. I'm going to be doing a workshop on how to set your banjo up to get the optimal sound and playability out of it. That's a mystery to a lot of folks. So if you're a banjo player, make sure to tune in. On Friday, I think Lucas has got me set up to perform a little bit. And what we had anticipated is, if you have favorite songs or requests that you'd like to hear me play, I'll be happy to do that on Friday. So you can always tune in to the American Banjo Museum schedule at AmericanBanjoMuseum.com. You can visit us on Facebook Live. All of the things that you are seeing over the past couple of weeks, our videos that we've been doing virtual at noon, are archived and you can rewatch them at Facebook Live. So take your time and go back and enjoy those things. And keep joining us. We're going to find out more treasures and dig up more stuff for you to tune in. Make it worth your while to spend a few minutes with us at noon every day. For right now, on behalf of the American Banjo Museum, thank you for joining us. Please continue your support. We can use your donations, or better yet, you can become a member of the American Banjo Museum and be in on all of the things that go on every day here in this wonderful facility in Oklahoma City. For now, my name is Johnny Baier. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Karen Falk. Bye-bye.